Good afternoon. Thank you for attending this webinar on continuous compliance. My name is Kishore Veswani, and I'm the Chief Strategy Officer of ControlCase. I really appreciate the time you have taken today to attend this webinar on continuous compliance. Our agenda today would primarily be focused on the different continuous compliance components and their frequencies. Our intention of this webinar, which we try to keep it short and sweet, no longer than 20 to 25 minutes, is to be able to provide you a checklist of important things we at ControlCase see are important for continuous compliance as part of your continuous compliance program. That will be a majority of what we spend our time on. A high-level introduction to ControlCase. We at ControlCase focus on IT certifications and related continuous compliance services. We certainly pride ourselves on having a partnership approach with customers instead of being a checklist auditor, as well as have automation to help companies streamline the certification and continuous compliance process. And here are some of the certification regimes and compliance regimes we participate in as we work with our customers to really have a vision of being able to assess one and certify to multiple regulations. While there are many regulations that exist out there, I thought it would be good just to go over a sample set of some of them that we would be referencing during our continuous compliance discussion, as well as showing mappings from here. PCI, which is the payment card industry, is a standard that was set by the different brands and the PCI Council to protect payment data as it goes through storage, transmission, and processing through the ecosystem. HIPAA was passed by Congress in 1996 and really focuses on healthcare data. ISO 27001 and 27002 is a higher level management framework to ensure that an organization has all the different components within the ecosystem to have a good security as well as privacy program. FISMA was passed by Congress, and it relates to the federal information systems. If you have heard of FedRAMP, CMMC, these are some of the frameworks or certifications that really rely to a large degree on FISMA or the NIST standards. PCI SSF is a fairly new standard, and it focuses on payment applications that support the PCI standards. NERC is related to the energy system and talks about security and availability in the energy sector. And then finally, the SOC 2 is an AICPA related certification, which the SOC 2 is delivered typically by CPA firms who evaluate organizations against all the different principles such as security, availability, confidentiality, etc. So again, this is a high level of what the different regulations in the ecosystem mean, and we will reference some of them as we go through our continuous compliance elements. As we also wanted to make sure you had handy, as ControlCase, here are some of the regulations we are seeing across these regions and industry that companies are signing up for and are more popular than other regulations in the industry. All right, that was a very high-level introduction to ControlCase, and it was also a very high-level introduction to some regulations that we see out there that are popular and that we see tie back to different domains of continuous compliance. I'm going to spend a minute here. I started off the webinar saying one of the most important things of this webinar is to be able to provide you a list of areas where you can take back to your organization and implement continuous compliance processes, because these are, at ControlCase, what we see across different regulations, areas which are very specific to a program to maintain continuous compliance. We're going to talk a little bit about each of them, but if you at your organization are looking at a holistic continuous compliance program, certainly this checklist and this list of areas should prove helpful. When we talk about continuous monitoring and continuous compliance, clearly there are a lot of moving parts, and so having a dashboard is an important part of continuous compliance. An important part of continuous compliance and monitoring is dashboards as well as mapping of controls across domains so that you can convert data into information. All right, let's get into some of the different components of continuous compliance. The first one, and which you can see very common across the different regulations that exist out there, is policy management. And policy management on a continuous compliance basis really requires that the policies and procedures are updated, that they are disseminated within the organization, and they map to the different corporate policies at the highest level. So policy management is clearly a piece of continuous compliance and making sure that these things are being updated on an ongoing basis. In today's world and over the last decade, we have seen a shift where many companies are outsourcing non-core functions to third parties or vendors. And while you can outsource business processes, you cannot outsource risk, and you as a company are still responsible for keeping your customers and your stakeholders' data secure and private. Well, what that brings up is an important domain of monitoring third parties. Monitoring third parties is an important aspect because without that monitoring piece, while you might be able to put controls over your ecosystem, your third parties may be doing things which are not in line with your corporate policies and put your data at risk. And hence, vendor and third party management is an important aspect of almost asset and vulnerability management. In today's world, we have cloud, we have non-cloud, we have all kinds of assets, all the way ranging from software to hardware. And with the ever-changing landscape of technology, new vulnerabilities show up and new assets show up in the organization. And so it's important to ensure that you have an ongoing asset and vulnerability management program to identify new assets, to identify new vulnerabilities, and to risk rank these vulnerabilities so that the risk of assets being non-compliant is reduced. Almost every regulation, as you can see on the top right side, requires assets and vulnerability management as part of their program. The next one is logging and monitoring. There are various terminologies used out there, SIEM, logging and monitoring, and so forth. So logging and monitoring, by its very nature, is a continuous compliance aspect, and it ties to many different things. When we say logging and monitoring, there's logging, there's file integrity monitoring, and then there is monitoring and incident response, which we'll also talk about a little bit later. But no continuous compliance program will be complete with an effective logging and monitoring strategy, which would include logging across assets, across events, managing data, archiving data, file integrity monitoring, and so forth. So extremely important to make sure that this is a part of any ongoing continuous compliance process. Change management. So we talk about logging and monitoring. Well, when you do see alerts in logs or you find anomalies from your monitoring activities, an important aspect is to tie it back to your change management system and try to identify if this is a predicted change which had gone through the change management system, or is this an unpredicted change which then should either generate an incident or some sort of a resolution notification or escalation to see that process through. And so while logging and monitoring is important, in isolation without a change management process, it would not really complete the full loop of a continuous compliance program. Once you do identify an unknown change, well, now you got to identify whether it's an incident that needs to be looked at in isolation, or is this a series of things that have been happening which are taken at a higher level towards a problem management system. So that's where incident management and problem management really become an important part of the overall continuous compliance process. You know, you're monitoring something, you're detecting, reporting, responding, and then approving some new changes to based on what you learned from the chain of events in there. Data management. When we talk about confidentiality of, personally identifiable information, when we talk about privacy of personally identifiable information, it all ties back to data. And so it is extremely important to make sure, as part of your continuous compliance, you are monitoring where your sensitive data lies, making sure the right level of protection is there, whether it's encryption, monitoring, and some of the other domains we talked about. And then there is an ongoing monitoring of any unknown data of sensitive type that shows up. So going through this chain of events and making sure the actual data which you're trying to protect and keep private is an important aspect of continuous compliance. The next one is risk management. Almost every program, every certification regime, or any regulation out there requires that company manage risk. Sometimes they ask for an annual risk assessment, but certainly in today's IT world that changes so often, probably annual is not good enough, and it really needs to become a continuous aspect. And risk management really makes sure that you are identifying the higher risks from the lower risks, because risks will exist in every environment out there. That's just the nature of a changing IT world. So there are going to be risks. Now, risk management on an ongoing basis helps you prioritize your resources on the risks that are the most urgent to be taken care of versus things that can wait in the long run. And an ongoing risk management program really provides that flexibility to an overall continuous compliance program. Business continuity is another aspect of continuous compliance. While it is common for business continuity plans to change on an annual basis or a semi-annual basis, it is extremely important that after any major change in any of the other domains, these programs be tested out so that you're not kept in a position of any downtime in case of unknown events. And these events could be technical in nature, they could be non-technical in nature, and so business continuity management becomes an important aspect of this. An often overlooked mechanism of a continuous compliance program is the actual people. At the end of the day, you have folks who work on sensitive data, who legitimately have access to sensitive data, and then within your broader ecosystem of contractors and vendors, there are additional folks. Having an ongoing program which does the right amount of training, for example, helping them understand that not to click on links and a phishing program and so forth. Certainly background screening folks, depending on the level of kind of access they have, reference checks and so forth, becomes an important HR management function that does tie back to information security and continuous compliance. And then physical security, probably everybody's aware, CCTV, badges, and so forth are an important aspect, making sure you're looking at CCTV images and badge logs on an ongoing basis to ensure they haven't stopped reporting, their disks are not full. We all know these things happen. And so having continuous compliance around this is also an important aspect. So what I went through, and I'll just highlight it at a very high level again, are domains that we at ControlCase feel are important to be a part of continuous compliance. Now, there are many other domains out there. We could go on and on. There could be 15, 20, 30 different other areas that could also be a part of your continuous compliance program. And certainly every company is different, and there will be additional domains you all look at. But we feel that at ControlCase, when we work with our customers, we really guide them towards making sure that across these areas, they do have a program on a continuous basis instead of a point-in-time basis. And again, we will be sending out these slides, so you will have this, to refer to later as well. As we move towards the end of this presentation, please feel free to put your questions in the questions window. We'll make sure we answer them as we have received them. The next section is recurrence, frequency, and calendar. Broadly speaking, we can classify things as daily, monthly, quarterly, and annual. And again, this is a very average view of what we have seen at ControlCase across customers. And here are things we see are being done on a daily basis: asset management and vulnerability management, log management, change management, and incident and problem management. These are things which typically we guide our customers, everything else equal, to be daily activities because of the volume and the velocity of changes that happen within these domains. Vendor and third-party management, data management, HR management, and physical security management, mostly monthly or quarterly. I don't think these things happen daily, but they either happen on a rotating basis or on a monthly and quarterly basis. And then policy management, risk management, BCP, DR, as I mentioned, it has been traditional for these to be annual activities. We are seeing increasingly that risk management is becoming a monthly and quarterly activity, but traditionally, most of the regulations have required that these be done at least on an annual basis. And so we just wanted to list out, some of the frequencies we see and some of the common frequencies. So we talked about the domains, and then we talk about the frequency. And really, every company can take those domains on x-axis and the frequency on y-axis and build their own continuous compliance program and ensure that those things are happening at the right frequency. Common challenges we see. Common challenges we see is, more has to be done with reducing budgets. Dashboards are not that effective, if at all. Once you find non-compliant aspects, fixing of these dispositions becomes an important aspect. Regulations only keep on increasing, and some mapping of regulations to avoid redundant effort is an important piece. And then finally, as I talked about, reliance on third parties whom you might have limited control over, and sometimes no control over, except maybe contracts and so forth, is an important aspect. So these are some of the common challenges which make continuous compliance difficult. At ControlCase, we focus on certification and continuous compliance services. Our continuous compliance services include, at the least, a quarterly review of 20 to 25 high impact, high risk questions. Our deliverable is a dashboard of quarterly compliance or non-compliance that we work with customers all. The benefits of continuous compliance are things like, you won't miss, we will identify if assets are missed as part of your quarterly scans, if logs are not reporting from all assets. If you are undergoing an audit with an auditor, it will reduce the effort for the final audit, and will also eliminate last-minute audit findings. The reason we feel this adds a lot of value is because 70% of companies' assets are non-compliant at some point during the year. And so we help you address that by doing things like identifying in-scope assets not reporting logs, risky firewall rule sets going undetected. And all of this is enabled through APIs and through agent-less, appliance-less technology that companies can utilize from ControlCase, send us the data in an automatic manner, and we do a lot of analysis in an automated manner to identify any of these non-compliant situations. And so again, if you have any questions, please put them in the questions window, and we will now answer them in the order we receive them. Before I get into the questions, again, thank you everybody for attending this webinar. Certainly reach out to us at www.controlcase.com in case of any questions and/or any areas we can help you with. And that being said, I will dive right into the questions that I have. The first question is, what are some of the common regulations out there that would require continuous compliance? I think different regulations have different needs. And what we talked about was, I call it a basket of common regulations. I'll take a few examples here. PCI DSS has its specific requirements, which range from quarterly to semi-annually to annually. And it ranges to make sure that things are looked at on an ongoing basis. I know there's a lot of federal mandates out there that actually require continuous compliance. And again, they probably all rely back in some form or shape on the NIST framework, and or FedRAMP/CMMC. So these are some of the ones that are, more specific on continuous compliance. There are others that are more management level frameworks like ISO, which don't really require it, but again, it's becoming a best practice everywhere. The next question is on logging and monitoring and SIEM, and the question is, with all the SIEM data coming in, how do you tie that back to all the different continuous compliance domains? Now that's a great question. Probably the logging and monitoring, the logging data, SIEM data, is probably the most voluminous data that comes in, and it's also the most finite data. So, manual mechanisms for monitoring it and tying it back just generally do not work. Obviously, analysts, looking at a screen of a lot of data cannot make that much difference. So you have to use the standard SIEM tools out there, and there's a whole industry of SIEM tools, and they will tell you that. And so that happens often. What is very often overlooked, which, really from a compliance perspective is important, is a lot of times target assets stop even reporting to the SIEM solution. And that's an example of where we think continuous compliance is needed, because if something stops, if everybody is reporting, many of these SIEM tools will do the correlations and identify issues. But what if something stops reporting? And having a program to do that, what if a new asset has been put in place? Having to do that is something that we think is an important part that ties back to the overall system. Well, that was the last question I had. If nobody else has any other questions, I do appreciate your time today to attend this webinar. Again, we'll be sending out a recording as well as a set of these slides. Feel free to reach out to us at www.controlcase.com in case of any questions. Thank you, be safe, and have a great day.